In a forgotten corner of St. Augustine Abbey in rural Pennsylvania, a photograph exists that someone has gently approached. 12 young men in pristine restorations, their faces filled with trust, stand before an altar, which will later become their graves. The date on the back of the photograph is clear: May 15, 1847. The day they were ordained priests. But strangely, none of them celebrated their first Mass. No one has ever been seen alive since that photograph. For more than 170 years, the Catholic Church has officially declared that the entire seminarian class of 1847 perished in a fire that burned the east wing of the abbey. But the ashes that remain tell a different story. One story has 13 footprints leading into the chapel and only one returning. In 1848, the church sealed the crypt forever, citing fictional. Since then, no one has been allowed to enter it again. What really happened to the 12 young priests? The answer, if there is one, is hidden under the dust of time and is filled with the opinions of American Catholic history. Are you still there? This is Sleepy History Tales, where we explore the most hidden secrets in human history. If you are someone who does not resist the truth, no matter how dark it is, click subscribe now and let us know which country you are watching this video from. Did today's story scare you? What do you think really happened in that sealed basement? Share your feelings in the comment section so we can follow the true hidden love story together. To understand the true horror of St. Augustine, we must go back in time to a time when faith and fear coexisted in the Pennsylvania wilderness. In 1847, the small town of Millbrook, nestled in the hills about 40 miles west of Philadelphia, a mere 300 people, mostly Irish immigrants, were trying to hold their own in a land rife with anti-Catholic prejudice. On the eastern edge of town, St. Augustine rose like a bastion of faith. Its thick limestone walls, soaring arched windows, and bell tower that rang out across the valley, all made a powerful statement of divine presence. Built in 1823 by Bishop Francis Kenrick, the abbey became a training center for priests serving Pennsylvania's vast frontier. The abbot was Father Marcus Whitmore, a theologian who had studied in Paris. He was known for his strictness, even cruelty. But the priests he trained were men of extraordinary faith and discipline. The seminarian class of 1847 was the most distinguished of the boys aged 22 to 28 who had completed 6 years of study with distinction. Their names are inscribed in the monastery's honor roll: Michael O'Brien, Boston Thomas Kellerman, Baltimore Patrick Murphy, New York James Fitzgerald, Philadelphia, and 8 others whose families had sacrificed everything so that they could serve God. Among them, Francis Benedetto, the son of Italian immigrants in Pittsburgh, stood out. At 24, Francis was not only fluent in 5 languages, but also had a brilliant mind and a deep understanding of theology. So much so that many believed he would become a bishop in the future. The seminarians lived in solitary cells on the 2nd floor of the East Wing, which later burned down. Every morning, they woke up at 4 a.m. to pray. The Laudes meditate, attend Mass, eat breakfast, and then plunge into 8 hours of non-stop study. What do you think of these men? Were they simply young priests? Or was there something more? We want to know what you think. Leave a comment. And if you're ready, Sleepy History Tales will take you deeper into the basement that has been sealed since 1848. Their days ended with Compline at 9 p.m., after which began what the church called the Great Silence. No words, no whispers, not even a breath too loud until the morning's first prayers broke the stillness. For 6 years, this rhythm had shaped their lives, sculpting them into future shepherds of souls. But in the final weeks before ordination, something changed inside the ancient stone walls of St. Augustine Seminary. It began with whispers in the dormitory corridors, strange dreams, recurring visions. A 13th figure, cloaked in black vestments, silently standing at the altar where their ordination was to take place. They all described him the same way, his face hidden in shadow, his presence terrifying, yet impossibly magnetic. None of them knew who he was, and none dared to speak of him during daylight. Father Whitmore noticed the change, the restlessness, the distracted eyes. During final examinations, their answers veered into troubling territory. When asked about the meaning of sacrifice, Francis Benedetto didn't mention Christ or the cross. Instead, he spoke of a greater sacrifice, one that opens the door to true understanding. When Thomas Kellerman was questioned about obedience, he replied, "Sometimes to obey God, you must disobey man." These weren't the words of youthful idealists. They hinted at something older, darker. Fathers Mills, Brennan and Kowalski had their own concerns. They had found the seminarians kneeling in the chapel late at night, gathered in a circle drawn in ash on the stone floor. When confronted, the young men all gave the same answer. A voice had called them, a voice that spoke only in dreams. Still, May 15th drew near, and the entire town of Millbrook buzzed with anticipation. It would be the most significant ordination ceremony the region had ever seen. Bishop Kenrick himself was traveling from Philadelphia to officiate. Families arrived from across the East Coast, filling every room at the town inn and staying with local residents who had opened their homes. The ceremony was set for 10 a.m., a joyous day of vows, sacred oil celebration, and transformation. The 12 young men would finally become priests, able to hear confessions, say Mass, guide lost souls to salvation. But on the night of May 14th, 1847, as the seminarians knelt for their final evening of prayer, none of them could have known. They were hours away from entering a mystery that would haunt the Catholic Church for generations. That evening began like any other. Final exams had ended. The afternoon passed in silence and solemn preparation. As night settled over the hills of Pennsylvania, the sound of Compline echoed softly through the stone halls. Candles flickered inside the chapel. Shadows danced across ancient stone. Father Whitmore led the prayers with a heaviness in his voice, blessing each of the 12 young men who by morning were to become servants of God. But something felt off. If you had watched closely that night, you might have noticed the subtle shift. the way their eyes weren't fixed on the altar, but on something above it, something unseen. At exactly 9 p.m., the great silence began. The seminarians filed out of the chapel in their usual order. Only the soft fall of feet echoed down the stone corridor. But Father Whitmore lingered a moment. He watched as Francis Benedetto reached the chapel door, paused and looked back. There was something in his eyes, not fear, but something eerily like expectation. What happened next would forever change the legacy of St. Augustine Seminary. You're watching Sleepy History Tales, where we uncover the forgotten, the forbidden, and the fearsome truths buried in the past. Let us know in the comments. Do you believe the seminarians were truly called by God, or by something else entirely? And where in the world are you watching? Since today, we'd love to see how far these tales travel. Don't forget to subscribe. We have so much more to reveal. Because the story of the 13th figure has only just begun. St. Augustine Seminary had stood for over 2 decades as a beacon of Catholic discipline and devotion. But on the night of May 14th, 1847, its sacred silence was broken. Brother Thomas Aquinas, the seminary's elderly porter, was making his final rounds when he heard a sound that froze his blood. From deep within the stone structure came the voice of the chapel's great bell. But it wasn't chiming the familiar hours. It rang out in a slow, deliberate rhythm. 12 tolls, a pause, 12 more, another pause, and again 12 tolls. Then silence. Brother Thomas knew the bell schedule better than anyone. No bell was supposed to ring during the great silence, and the bell tower locked every night. Father Whitmore kept the only key. Yet there was no mistaking the sound. It was the seminary's own great bronze bell, crying out across the valley like a voice from the grave. As Brother Thomas rushed toward the tower, he met Father Jonathan Mills emerging from his quarters, his face pale and drawn. "Brother, did you hear?" But his question was cut short. A new sound echoed from the chapel chanting, not the familiar Latin prayers of Compline. This was something different, older, darker. The voices were unmistakably those of the 12 seminarians. But the language was not of any Christian liturgy. It surged and fell like waves, crashing in the deep, mysterious refrains and choral responses, echoing in unnatural ways against the chapel's ancient stones. As Father Mills and Brother Thomas approached the chapel doors, a strange dread gripped them. The massive oak portals, opened just an hour before, were now sealed shut. Father Mills pressed his ear to the wood. The voices inside were clearer now, but the words changed as he listened, as if the very air was warping the sound into something else. Then footsteps, not outside, but inside the chapel, descending, stone on stone. But the chapel had no stairs, only a level stone floor and the raised altar at the far end. Suddenly, Father Whitmore appeared at the end of the corridor, his robes sweeping behind him, a ring of keys clutched tightly in his hand. "The bell tower is locked," he said grimly. "No one could have rung it from above." Now joined by their superior, the 2 men stood before the chapel doors, listening to the impossible chanting from within. Father Whitmore selected the master key the one that had opened every door in the seminary for over 20 years. He inserted it into the lock. It didn't turn. It wouldn't move at all. It was as if the mechanism had frozen, or as if something on the other side refused to let them in. "Get Fathers Brennan and Kowalski," Whitmore ordered. "Something is very wrong here." Brother Thomas vanished down the corridor. Inside the chapel, the voices grew louder, more urgent, more inhuman. And beneath them, the unmistakable sound of footsteps continued descending stairs that did not exist. Minutes later, Fathers Brennan and Kowalski arrived, their faces shadowed with the same unease. Together, the four priests and Brother Thomas tried to force the chapel doors open. Nothing worked. It was as if the chapel had been sealed, not by wood or iron, but by will. Then suddenly silence, a silence so complete it pressed in on them like a weight. Not peaceful, but oppressive, unnatural. Father Whitmore called out to the seminarians. No response. For nearly an hour, they tried everything to gain entry tools, force prayer. Nothing made a difference. At last, Whitmore made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his days. "We'll go around," he said quietly. Through the sacristy, the five men moved quickly through the cold stone corridors to the small external door that led to the sacristy, a storage room for vestments and sacred vessels, with a narrow entrance into the chapel's side. This lock accepted Whitmore's key. The door swung open without resistance. What they found inside, was nothing any of them could have prepared for. The chapel was empty, not simply vacant, but impossibly, unnaturally empty. The 12 seminarians whose voices had echoed just moments before were gone. No sign of a struggle, no blood, no farewell. Their prayer books lay scattered across the stone floor pages, torn and fluttered like autumn leaves caught in a wind that had never blown. The candles were cold, recently snuffed. Their scent still lingered wax smoke and something sweeter. But it was the altar that shook the priests to their very core. The massive stone structure, unchanged for over 20 years, had been moved. Not shifted slightly, but completely relocated. Beneath it a hole, a perfectly circular opening, roughly 4 feet across, descending into utter blackness, so deep their lanterns couldn't touch the bottom. Father Whitmore stepped closer, each footfall hesitant. Stone steps spiraled down into the earth, carved into the walls of the shaft. The stone was old, far older than the seminary, covered in strange symbols that none of them recognized. From the opening rose a scent, sweet, cloying, unnatural. It seemed to fill their heads with dizziness and something like euphoria. "This is impossible," Father Brennan whispered. "The chapel was built on solid ground. There's no basement, no crypt. No foundation records mention this." Father Kowalski knelt beside the pit, holding his lamp out as far as he dared. "The stairs go down at least 20 feet, he said. "There are more symbols, but I can't see where they lead." As the priests debated, Brother Thomas made a discovery. Near the altar, half hidden beneath a torn prayer book, lay a folded piece of parchment. Old, yellowed, the handwriting unfamiliar. Father Whitmore read it aloud. to those who seek the truth beyond the veil of mortal understanding, know that the path to true enlightenment requires sacrifice beyond what the weak-hearted can comprehend. The 12 who descend this night do so of their own will, called by voices that speak from depths older than any church, older than any faith built by human hands. They go to serve a purpose higher than any earthly ordination can provide. Seek them not in the world above, for they have chosen to serve in the world below. Their sacrifice opens the door for others to follow. The 13th witness remains to tell their tale. There was no signature, but its meaning was undeniable. The seminarians hadn't been taken. They had chosen to descend. Into what and for whom? And perhaps most chilling of all, who was the 13th witness? Father Whitmore folded the parchment with trembling hands and tucked it into his vestments. "We must search the opening," he said, though his voice betrayed his dread. "If there's any chance they're still alive." But before any of them could move, a sound rose from the pit, stone grinding on stone, as if something enormous was shifting into place. The priests watched in horror as the spiral staircase began to vanish section by section, retracting downward into the earth until the hole itself was sealed shut. In its place, solid floor. The altar impossibly had returned to its original place, as if it had never moved at all. Only the scattered prayer books and the sweet scent in the air hinted at what had happened. If they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, the priests might have believed it all a fevered dream, but it wasn't. The seminarians were gone. 12 young men who had dedicated their lives to the service of God vanished into the earth beneath their own chapel without a trace. And so, as dawn broke across the Pennsylvania countryside, the bells of St. Augustine Seminary remained silent. There would be no ordination that day, no celebration, no joy, only the beginning of a lie. Families who had traveled for days were told a tragedy had occurred during the night. A fire. A devastating blaze in the East Wing that had claimed the lives of all 12 men. And later that morning, the wing was intentionally set ablaze. The evidence gone, burned, buried. A cover-up that would last over 170 years. The official story was clean, tidy, sanitized. Church records would later show that the 12 young seminarians had perished in a tragic fire trapped in their dormitory, overcome by smoke, their bodies consumed by flame. No remains were ever found. No funerals were held, just a solemn memorial and silence. But 5 men, Father Whitmore, Fathers Mills Brennan and Kowalski, and Brother Thomas, knew the truth. And they would carry the weight of that terrible night for the rest of their lives. They had witnessed something that shattered the very foundation of their faith. Something that suggested the existence of powers older than Scripture and far less merciful. Somewhere beneath the stone foundations of St. Augustine Seminary, within chambers that predated Christianity itself, 12 men who had once prepared to serve God were now serving something else. Something ancient. Something hungry. The investigation into the fire lasted precisely 3 days. Church officials from Philadelphia arrived before sunrise in black carriages that moved through Millbrook like a funeral procession. They surveyed the ashes of the East Wing, interviewed the survivors, and issued their final report with a speed that felt rehearsed. According to the documents, a lamp had been accidentally knocked over in one of the dorm rooms. The fire spread rapidly through the old wood. All 12 seminarians were caught in the blaze, their bodies completely consumed. It was deemed an accident, a tragic but simple misstep on the eve of a holy day. But the men who had stood before that impossible hole in the chapel floor knew better. They had looked into the abyss, and the abyss had looked back. In the weeks that followed, something in the air around the seminary shifted. The remaining students, those still early in their studies, began speaking in hushed voices. They dreamt nightly of 12 figures in white vestments gliding silently through the corridors, always walking toward the chapel, but never arriving. The dreams always ended the same way, stone grinding against stone, and a voice calling from below, a voice not heard with the ears, but within the mind. Father Whitmore began having visions of his own. Each night in prayer, he saw Francis Benedetto standing once more at the chapel altar. His face was peaceful, his eyes impossibly deep, filled with knowledge that seemed inhuman. Francis never spoke, but he always gestured to the ground, to the place where the stone had opened, and a voice would echo silently in Whitmore's mind. The door remains open for those who truly seek. The chapel became a place of unease. During Mass, priests noted subtle shifts in the altar, as if the stone beneath it moved of its own accord. The sweet scent, the one that rose from the opening on the night of the disappearance, would return at random, always during moments of intense solemnity, always without explanation. Late at night, faint chanting could sometimes be heard, always in the same unknown tongue once spoken by the vanished seminarians. Brother Thomas, still performing his nightly rounds, began keeping a private journal. Obsessively, he documented everything: footsteps in empty corridors, doors that opened on their own, and most disturbingly, 13 shadows cast by 12 candles. Again and again the number 13 appeared. Students reported only 13 stations of the cross instead of 14. 13 candles found burning on the altar, though the inventory confirmed only 12 were kept. At meals, the refectory would sometimes be set for 13, even when only 12 had been expected, and no one could say who had laid the extra place. Then Father Mills, the seminary's librarian, made a discovery. While cataloging volumes in the theological section, he found a book that hadn't been there before. A leather-bound manuscript, ancient, written entirely in Latin. The title, De Mysteris Antiquis, on ancient mysteries. The pages were filled with references to pre-Christian religious rites, rituals practiced by peoples long before the arrival of Europeans in the New World. The margins of the book were heavily annotated. In a distinct, unmistakable hand, Francis Benedetto. The manuscript was unlike anything Father Mills had ever seen. Its pages described not only forgotten rites, but locations, sacred sites said to retain immense spiritual energy, accessible only through specific rituals and sacrifices. But it was what lay hidden between the pages that turned academic curiosity into chilling revelation. The book contained architectural diagrams, blueprints of underground chambers carefully concealed beneath religious buildings. These were not crypts or storage vaults. They were conduits designed for contact with entities beyond the known world. When Father Mills brought the manuscript to Father Whitmore, the color drained from the elder priest's face. The annotations in the margins, the handwriting, were unmistakable. Francis Benedetto. He had been studying these rites, not casually, but obsessively, for months, possibly years. His notes suggested a belief that true enlightenment required communion with powers older than Christianity, powers deliberately hidden by the church. Then came the letters. Tucked between the pages, Father Mills found several personal handwritten letters from Francis to his fellow seminarians. In them, he spoke of a higher calling, one that their Catholic ordination could never fulfill. Their service to the church was only a beginning. The true path, he claimed, lay in embracing the old ways, a road that would lead them to divine truths the church had long denied. One final letter, dated just 3 days before the ordination, made Father Whitmore's blood run cold. The 13 who serve below have waited centuries for successors. We 12 have been chosen to join them to become the bridge between the world of light and the world of shadow. Our earthly ordination would bind us to man's limited understanding of God. Our true ordination will bind us to serve the forces that shaped the world. Before man drew breath, outside the seminary, the land itself seemed to react. As winter crept across the Pennsylvania countryside, farmers noticed their livestock refused to graze in fields facing the seminary walls. Children in the town of Millbrook began muttering in their sleep, uttering syllables their parents didn't recognize, but which, to those who had heard them once before, sounded eerily similar to the ancient language chanted in the chapel that fateful night. Dr. Samuel Richardson, the town physician, began keeping quiet notes. He documented a sharp increase in cases of night terrors. The dreams were always the same. 12 young men in white vestments descending stone steps, followed by a 13th figure, its face hidden in shadow. And then darkness. But the most disturbing changes of all were not in the town. They were in Father Whitmore. Once a man of unshakable conviction, his demeanor became haunted, withdrawn, fragile. He spent hours each day in the chapel on his knees, at the spot where the altar had once shifted. His lips moved constantly, but those who overheard him swore he wasn't reciting scripture. He was repeating those same ancient syllables. Father Brennan, deeply troubled, began keeping a journal of his own. Its entries painted a portrait of a man unraveling his superior, tormented by knowledge he could no longer contain. He wrote of finding Father Whitmore speaking aloud at night to no one, sometimes weeping, sometimes laughing, sometimes simply listening. And in the final pages of his journal, Father Brennan revealed something that chilled even him. He has begun referring to himself as the 13th witness, the same phrase from the mysterious parchment found after the disappearance, the same figure seen in townspeople's dreams, the final piece in the pattern. By the time the first anniversary of the fire approached, St. Augustine Seminary was a ghost of its former self. Enrollment had dwindled to fewer than 20 students. Families who had once considered it a sacred honor to send their sons to St. Augustine now hesitated. The shadows had grown too long, and whatever lived beneath the chapel was not finished. By the spring of 1848, St. Augustine Seminary had become a place spoken of only in whispers. The surrounding town now avoided it entirely. Children crossed themselves when they passed its gates. Local farmers stopped working land that bordered its stone walls. Rumors spread like wildfire through the Catholic communities of Pennsylvania. They spoke of a cursed seminary where young men vanished, where sweet scents and strange voices rose after midnight, where shadows moved even when there was no light to cast them. Within the church's upper circles, officials in Philadelphia began quiet discussions about closing the seminary for good. It was no longer just a failing institution. It had become a liability, a source of scandal and whispers that threatened to fracture the church's hold over the region. But before any final decision could be made, a letter arrived. It came on the morning of May 14th, 1848, exactly 1 year to the day since the disappearance of the 12 seminarians. There was no return address. The handwriting was elegant, deliberate, yet unfamiliar to any of the faculty. Father Whitmore opened it with trembling hands, and as he read the words aloud to the others gathered in the faculty hall, the color drained from his face. There were only a few lines, but they were enough to shatter what little peace remained. To the faithful servants of St. Augustine Seminary, the year of preparation is complete. The door beneath the sacred altar opens once more tonight. The 13th witness must choose. Remain in the world of light and watch your flock scatter like leaves before the wind, or descend to join those who serve the deeper truth. The choice has always been yours, Marcus. The 12 who wait below call your name in voices that carry the weight of centuries. Come to us freely, or watch your life's work crumble to dust. It was unsigned, but Whitmore knew the hand that had written it. Francis Benedetto, unchanged, as if the earth itself had preserved his script. Father Brennan, watching his old friend closely, whispered, "Marcus, what does it say?" Whitmore's reply was barely audible. "They're calling me home." He clutched the letter to his chest like a lifeline. His eyes, once sharp with reason, now stared into a place only he could see, an abyss that had begun to stare back. As the sun dipped behind the hills, the seminary began to change. The air grew dense. Every corridor was thick with that sweet, sickly perfume, the one that had appeared for a year in flashes, now constant. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, as if the stone remembered. Father Kowalski, who had spent months writing quiet warnings to the church, composed his final letter that afternoon. He described Father Whitmore's condition in grim detail. He spoke of a presence growing beneath the chapel, something old, malevolent, aware. He ended with a plea, "Send help. Immediately. We are no longer in control of what happens here. Night fell over the valley. Evening prayers began as they always had. But now every motion felt like ritual to hold back something inevitable. Fewer than 20 students remained. The brave, the faithful, or perhaps the doomed. They knelt in the candlelit chapel with tightened jaws and eyes full of fear. They could feel it too, whatever it was. The building seemed to wait, holding its breath. Father Whitmore led prayers with a frantic energy. His voice trembled, breaking into strange rhythms. His hands shook so violently during the final blessing that he nearly dropped the book. As the students left exchanging anxious glances, the 4 remaining priests gathered silently in Whitmore's study. Something was coming, and every man in that room knew it. The room had once been a sanctuary, a place of learning, reflection, and sacred purpose. Now it felt like a tomb. Books lay torn and scattered across the stone floor, like wounded relics, their knowledge discarded. The shelves once lined with centuries of theological wisdom now stood bare, framed only by faded outlines where portraits had hung. A silence lingered thick and unnatural, broken only by Father Mills's quiet voice. "Marcus, you need to leave this place. Whatever happened here, whatever is still happening, it's destroying you." Father Whitmore turned slowly to face his brothers in faith, and they saw it. A glow behind his eyes, an ancient knowing so deep and unnatural, it made the air feel colder. "You don't understand," he said, his voice not entirely his own. "They didn't disappear. They were chosen." His words echoed strangely, as if spoken from beneath the stone floor. They were called to serve something far greater than any of us can comprehend. Father Brennan stepped forward, shaking his head. "Listen to yourself. You're abandoning everything we've sworn to uphold our vows, our faith, our duty to these students." Whitmore's response was a laugh, but it wasn't his laugh. It was too hollow, too wide. "Our duty. We've been teaching them to serve a diminished God, a God limited by human fear. But what lies beneath this chapel was old before man had language." He paused, eyes burning. The 12 understood this, and tonight I joined them. As his words faded, a new sound began. From deep below the seminary came the rhythmic pounding of stone, slow, measured, relentless, stone against stone, like massive blocks shifting into place beneath their feet. The vibrations moved up through the floor into the bones of every man in the room. "They're preparing," Whitmore whispered. "The door will open again, and this time it will remain open. The 13 who serve below will finally have their witness above." Father Kowalski stood abruptly. "I'm going to the chapel," he said. "If there's any chance, any hope they're alive." "They're not alive," Whitmore cut in. "Not in any way you'd understand. They've been elevated." The pounding grew louder. Dust rained from the rafters. The stone itself groaned under the pressure. Students could be heard shouting from the dormitories. Beds clattered against the walls. A single cry of "What's happening?" cut through the darkened halls. Father Mills made a decision, that would save his life, but haunt his sleep. Evacuate the students, get them out, seal this place, and send word to Philadelphia. But Whitmore was already walking. His footsteps were slow, deliberate, inevitable. "You can try to stop what's coming," he said without looking back, "but you cannot undo what has already begun. The door opens tonight, and I take my place among the chosen." The 3 remaining priests followed helpless into the deepening dark. Students emerged from their rooms, eyes wide with fear, clutching one another as the building trembled around them. The air thickened, every breath now labored. The corridor to the chapel glowed with an unearthly blue light, seeping from beneath the heavy oak doors. Not candlelight, not fire, something older, colder. A heartbeat deep in the stone echoed through the walls, growing more complex, more alive. Father Whitmore stepped forward. His hand touched the ancient wood. The door swung open without resistance, and what lay beyond them would be burned into their memories forever. The chapel was no longer a place of God. Its floor had opened once more, wider than before. A perfect circle, 8 feet across, exposing a spiral staircase carved deep into the living rock. But it wasn't just the stone that drew the eye. A blue light cold, pulsing unnatural, rose from the depths below, bathing the chapel in an ethereal glow. And standing at the edge of the abyss were the 12 lost seminarians. But they were no longer the same men. Their white vestments now shimmered like liquid moonlight. Their eyes, no longer human, ageless, infinite, unknowable. They moved in perfect unison, their gestures forming shapes and symbols that hurt to look at, as if the very fabric of reality rejected them. And when they spoke, their harmonized voices created tones that made the very walls tremble. "Marcus," they intoned, "the circle is almost complete. Take your place among us, and the work can truly begin." From the center of the opening it rose, a figure robed in a material that drank the light as if clothed in living shadow. Where its face should have been, there was only void. Not absence, but a presence so ancient and vast that the mind recoiled. "The Third Witness," it said, in a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere at once. The bridge between what was and what will be. Father Whitmore stepped forward, his face transformed, caught between ecstasy and terror. "I understand now," he said, his voice now resonating with the inhuman harmonics of the others. "I've been chosen to serve something greater than any earthly church could imagine." He took another step toward the abyss, and the truth became clear. This was never about 12 missing men. This was about a transformation, a recruitment into service of something that existed between light and shadow, older than humanity, older than God. These weren't demons. They were entities, patient, calculating, who had been waiting beneath the chapel for centuries. Now they were ready. Father Brennan, heart racing, lunged to stop his mentor, his friend. But the seminarians moved with impossible speed. Their hands seized him cold as stone, yet burning with unnatural strength. And as they held him, he felt his mind invaded. Images, thoughts, truths that twisted the soul, visions of cosmic insignificance. A universe ruled not by morality or meaning, but by indifference wrapped in ritual. You cannot stop what has already begun, said Francis Benedetto, his voice now carrying eternal certainty. The door is open. Those below have waited long enough. The 13th witness will carry our truth to every corner of the world above. Panic spread. The air crackled with pressure like the world itself was tensing. Father Kowalski, shaking but undeterred, did the only thing he could. He began to pray. Pater noster quies in caelis. The words, Latin sacred defiant, cut through the noise. The blue light faltered. The perfect harmony of the seminarians wavered. For the first time they seemed unsure. The robed figure turned its faceless gaze toward him, and Father Kowalski felt it. A presence, ancient, alien, limitless, something vast and sentient, was probing his mind, sifting through faith like pages in an old book. And then its voice, colder than death. Your prayers have no power here. The entity spoke, and the chapel stone air memory itself groaned beneath its voice. This place was sacred long before your carpenter God walked among men. The earth remembers older truths, older powers. Your faith is but a flickering candle in the face of an eternal darkness. And still Father Kowalski prayed, his voice shaking but unyielding, pressed forward like a beam of light through a black sea. One by one, the other priests joined him. Their words formed a wall of sacred sound. And for a moment, a fragile, trembling moment it held. The seminarians stopped. The void-born figure watched, and the man once known as Marcus Whitmore wavered. Could faith be enough? Could a handful of aging men hold back what had waited for millennia? Then Francis Benedetto spoke. Just one word, in that ancient language. And the chapel itself seemed to clench. The priests fell silent, not by choice but by force. Something pressed down upon their lungs, their throats, their souls. The air became solid. Their shadows stretched and twisted in ways that mocked physics, bending upward sideways, even curling toward the light itself. And Father Whitmore turned one final time. His face was no longer human, but his eyes, there just beneath the ancient knowing was a flicker of the man they'd once called friend. Tell them, he said, his voice a hollow echo of the past. Tell them we found what we were truly seeking. Tell them the door has opened, and soon others will follow. Marcus? Father Mills gasped, a whisper, a plea. Too late. Father Whitmore stepped into the light and disappeared. The seminarians followed. Their movements formed symbols that burned into the priests' minds. The kind of movement you forget to remember, lest madness take root. As each vanished into the depths, the chapel shook with growing pressure. Stone split, floor cracked, the opening widened. What had once been a passage was becoming a gateway, a portal between worlds, designed not just to receive souls, but to release something far worse. Father Brennan, still held in place, felt his thoughts fracture. Visions tore through him like glass, caverns that spiraled to the earth's core. Ancient beings performing rituals with no beginning or end. Cities, entire cities beneath our feet, still alive, with inhuman life, a future where the barrier between dimensions is dust and shadow walks freely in the world of light. Was this what the church had always feared, not damnation, but irrelevance in the face of something older than heaven itself? And just when sanity seemed beyond reach, a sound, a presence, and then light, not the cold blue of the abyss, but a warm, flickering gold. Brother Thomas burst into the chapel, breath-ragged, sweat-streaked, carrying a massive wooden cross, old, worn, carved from wood, said to be taken from the tree where St. Patrick once brought down the old gods of Ireland. The moment that cross crossed the threshold, everything changed. The blue light flickered, then dimmed, then recoiled. Something had been remembered, a name perhaps, a symbol, a truth that even the ancient ones had once feared. The seminarian's grip on Father Brennan fell away completely. Around him, the crushing weight in the air began to lift, as if the ancient stone walls of the chapel were releasing a long-held breath. The cross in Brother Thomas's hands seemed to vibrate not with violence, but with memory. Something old stirred inside it. Not just Christian, not just Celtic, but older still, a truth that remembered when light and shadow were not enemies, but partners bound by the oldest promise, each in their place. The old wood remembers older truths. Brother Thomas said, his voice steady and clearer than bells. This tree was sacred before Christianity ever came to Ireland. It remembers the bargains made when the missionaries arrived. Light and shadow agreed to coexist, but only in their proper realms. The tall figure turned toward him then, and Brother Thomas felt it, a mind older than time itself, pressing gently, terribly into his soul. But the cross glowed faintly in his hands, casting a warmth that no shadow could touch. The presence could not enter. You speak of bargains made in darkness. The entity rumbled its voice, no longer mocking, but respectful. But those agreements did not account for willing servants. These 12 came to us, freely offering their souls in exchange for knowledge. They were deceived, Brother Thomas answered, lifting the cross higher. You showed them cosmic truth, but cloaked the chains that followed it. You promised understanding, but delivered enslavement. The door you seek to open would swallow the world in your darkness. The seminarians faltered, their perfect unnatural synchronization dissolved. Their eyes, once burning with cold alien light, now shifted, hesitant. Their heads turned, their faces softened. For the first time since the previous May, they were individuals again, and for a breathless moment, they remembered. Francis Benedetto looked up. His voice trembled. We chose this, he said. Didn't we? But the conviction had drained from his words like blood from a wound. We sought truth beyond the limits of the church. No, Brother Thomas said. You sought escape from responsibility, from doubt, from the burden of serving those who looked to you for light. He stepped forward. His eyes locked with Francis's. Look what your choice brought. A sanctuary turned to terror. Students betrayed. A chapel meant for healing, broken open like a grave. The seminarians turned slowly like sleepers, waking from a long, dark dream. Their eyes met the terrified faces of their younger peers. Some wept. Others stared paralyzed. One whispered a prayer. Another simply asked why. The blue light at the center of the chapel flickered, and the tall figure shifted. It had not expected this. Doubt had entered the minds of the chosen. Then from the spiral stairs, a voice, human, fragile, and repentant. I can see now, it said. I see what this really is. Father Whitmore's voice rising from the depths. The visions, they were lies, half-truths. This path doesn't lead to enlightenment. It leads to destruction of all we were sworn to protect. The figure at the center did not move, but its rage was palpable, a static in the air. And yet, the seminarians turned. They heard their former mentor, and they believed him. Francis Benedetto stepped to the edge of the opening, eyes searching the shadows below. His hand hovered over his chest where his rosary once hung. We didn't understand, he whispered, but we do now. From the far corridor, a voice of a student, small trembling, "Please come back." And for the first time, the blue glow began to retreat. Francis Benedetto's hands trembled at his sides. He turned slowly, eyes sweeping across the chapel, now split down the center by a war of radiance. To his left, the surviving priests, their forms wreathed in golden light cast by Brother Thomas's ancient cross. Their faces lit not by certainty, but conviction. To his right, the figure in the pit, now towering and red, lit a shadow without edges that whispered to the very foundations of the earth. "They promised us understanding," Francis said softly. "They showed us truths." No, Father Whitmore's voice echoed up from the depths. "They showed you pieces of a truth. Enough to open your minds, but not enough to see the cage. They promised us freedom. Then why are you still bound to their will?" Francis staggered back from the opening. He looked at his hands, ageless, cold, inhuman. Then at the students gathered in the corridor, terrified, trembling, holding each other as their world collapsed around them. "We were supposed to guide them." His voice cracked. The other seminarians watched him, and one by one their perfect stillness broke. Small signs at first, a lowered gaze, a hand clenched over a heart, tears forming in eyes long thought incapable of weeping. We were never meant to bring them to this. We forgot who we were. We forgot why we came. The figure in the pit unleashed a scream, not of air, but of pressure, a sound like tectonic plates grinding together beneath the ocean floor. "You are mine," it roared. "You came to me freely. You cannot unmake the bargain." But something had changed. Faith, real faith, had returned to those who had once abandoned it. Francis turned to Brother Thomas. "Can it be undone?" he asked. Brother Thomas raised the cross. It now shone with a fierce gold light, almost too bright to look at directly. "Only if you choose again. You were deceived, but the next choice must be made with your eyes open." The seminarians formed a circle around the opening. One by one, they removed their white vestments, letting them fall like the shed skin of a snake. Then, reaching within themselves beyond alien memory, beyond borrowed power, they began to pray. In Latin, not the ancient tongue of the entity below, but the language of the church that had once guided them. "Pater noster quies in caelis sanctificetur nomen tuum." The blue-red glow shuddered, fracturing like glass under stress. The figure in the pit roared, "You cannot leave." The compact was never sealed. Francis interrupted, his voice calm. "Because we were never given the full truth." The opening began to shrink. Stone moved like flesh. The ceiling, which had stretched into alien vistas, snapped back into place as if reality itself were healing from a wound. As the light withdrew, so too did the shadows hold. The seminarians, now collapsed on the floor in exhaustion, looked human again, pale, tear-streaked. But themselves? Only Father Whitmore remained below. Marcus Francis whispered, "Come back. It's over." But no answer came. Only the faintest echo. "Tell them we tried." The final glimpse the priest saw was Father Whitmore kneeling at the base of the spiral steps, praying silently as the stones sealed above him. The chapel was still, the light gone, the altar intact. The doorway between worlds closed. For now, outside, dawn broke over the hills of Pennsylvania. The sweet scent that had haunted the corridors for over a year was gone. In its place came the sharp, clean smell of old wood and candle wax and ash. Only now did the priest realize that the ancient cross Brother Thomas had held was gone, burned away in his hands. In the months that followed, the seminary quietly shut its doors. The church issued no new statements. The students were relocated. The chapel was sealed, and the land eventually was sold to private developers who never built a single structure on it. Animals avoided the field. Machines broke without reason, and no one ever stayed past sunset. The journal of Brother Thomas ends with a single line. Some doors close, others wait. Francis Benedetto took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling like a man waking from a long and terrible dream. His voice, when it came, was hoarse but steady. "I choose faith." The declaration rang through the chapel like a struck bell, clear and resonant. The other seminarians turned to him, their expressions blank at first, then softening, cracking, changing. One by one, they echoed him. "I choose faith. I choose service. I choose light." Each declaration caused the blue-red radiance from the pit to shudder, the energy fraying at its edges. The seminarians stepped back from the opening, their white vestments dimming, then shedding completely like ash in the wind. Their skin, once unnaturally smooth and ageless, flushed with warmth and life again. Tears streaked their cheeks. "This is blasphemy," the tall figure roared. "You were ours." But its voice no longer shook the stones. Its power was waning. The compact built on half-truths and manipulation was unraveling. No Father Whitmore's voice echoed from below, calm and resolute now. "They are no longer yours." A burst of warm golden light surged from the pit, not from Brother Thomas's cross, but from within the stone itself, as if the earth were exhaling a deep-held truth. The chapel no longer shook from alien rage, but breathed with the peace of something sacred reclaimed. The tall figure let out one final cry, not of fury, but of fear. Then it was gone. The light from the opening faded, the steps retracted, and for the final time, the floor of the chapel sealed not with violence, but with the quiet permanence of a door that had finally been locked from the inside. There was silence, real human silence. Then Francis whispered, "What about Father Whitmore?" Brother Thomas lowered the cross, its glow finally fading. He knelt beside the place where the opening had once been. He chose to stay, to be the last witness, but not to serve. He became the seal. Father Brennan crossed himself, a soul offered not in surrender, but in sacrifice. That has power even ancient things must honor. Epilogue. In the days that followed, St. Augustine's Seminary was quietly deconsecrated and shuttered. The church issued no public explanation, but each of the 12 returned seminarians were quietly reassigned, serving in hospitals, orphanages, war zones. Not one of them ever sought promotion or recognition. They lived quietly but powerfully in service to those most in need. And Brother Thomas, he stayed, not as a porter, but as a guardian. Each evening, he would light a candle in the now empty chapel. Just one. No mass, no prayers. Just a flame and a whispered vow. The door is closed. Let it stay closed, and let those who remember keep watch. But those who had been there would never forget. The priests, seminarians, and Brother Thomas stood in silence for a long while, bathed in the golden light of the rising sun, filtering through the chapel's stained glass windows. No one spoke. There were no rituals to mark the return of 13 lost souls from the edge of cosmic annihilation. Only silence, only breath drawn freely, gratefully. Eventually, Francis Benedetto stepped forward and knelt where the opening had once been. He placed his hand upon the cold stone floor, eyes closed. For the rest of my life, he said softly, I will serve those who doubt, those who are tempted, those who stand at the edge and need someone to call them back. One by one, the other seminarians knelt beside him, joined by Father Whitmore. No longer the 13th witness, just Marcus again. A man, broken but whole. Father Mills crossed himself. Let this place remain a sanctuary, he whispered. Not a prison, not a portal. Just sanctuary. Brother Thomas stood, last holding the cross close to his chest. Its glow had faded, but the warmth remained. He turned to the others. We seal it not with force, but with choice, with truth. Let it stay sealed. And with that, the true exorcism was complete. In the years that followed, St. Augustine's Seminary quietly reopened under a new charter. Its focus shifted from traditional priestly ordination to spiritual care and healing, especially for those recovering from religious trauma crises of faith and experiences that defied explanation. The 12 seminarians and Father Whitmore never spoke publicly about what had happened, not because they were sworn to secrecy, but because words could never fully contain the truth. Brother Thomas remained until his death regarded by the entire town of Millbrook as a saint in life. His cross carved from the sacred tree was enshrined above the chapel's altar, never worshipped, never idolized, but remembered. Father Brennan, Father Mills, and Father Kowalski wrote personal accounts of the events. All 3 manuscripts were sealed in the Vatican archives, where they remain to this day, under the heading Documentum Testimonium, filed May 15th, 1848. Status access restricted. Class 7. Anomalous event. But some say, on the night of each May 14th, just before midnight, the air in the chapel grows still. Candles flicker without wind. And those with hearts attuned to faith, not doctrine, not dogma, but faith, can hear a soft voice echoing beneath the floor. I chose the light. Let others do the same. We stay He declared again, firmer now, his voice echoing through the chapel like a benediction. This ground has been consecrated by both trial and triumph. It's no longer just a place of learning. It's a symbol, a watchtower, a warning. The others nodded, the weight of his words settling into their bones. They understood now that St. Augustine's Seminary had become more than a school. It was now a threshold, a place where two worlds had briefly touched and where light had prevailed. In the months that followed, the church sent representatives, of course. Officials from Philadelphia arrived with skepticism in their eyes and protocol in their hands. But when they read the leather-bound journal, when they walked the halls and spoke with the students, the seminarians, and the priests, they left in quiet reflection, unable to deny the inexplicable, unwilling to mock the divine. The Vatican placed the seminary under special oversight, granting it a new designation, Sanctum Vigilantia, the Holy Watch. Its mission changed. No longer just a place of theological instruction, it became a training ground for spiritual defenders, men and women called not only to serve in the light, but to recognize and resist the dark. Here, seminarians learned not just Latin and liturgy, but how to discern truth from deception, faith from fanaticism, and the voice of God from whispers in shadowed corridors. Brother Thomas remained at St. Augustine, his simple faith and quiet strength becoming legend. The cross he carried that night was mounted behind the altar, where its golden warmth could be felt by all who entered. But he never let it become an idol. Faith isn't carved in wood, he often said. It's carved in choice. Father Whitmore, scarred but steady, led the seminary into its new era. He wrote volumes on cosmic theology and the laws that governed other realms, not to glorify them, but to guard against them. His work laid the foundation for a field of study once whispered about only in rumored defensive eschatology. As for the 12 seminarians, they became the first guardians of the watchtower. They were never ordained in the traditional sense, but their service earned in the crucible of temptation and reclaimed through impossible courage was greater than any ceremonial laying of hands. But still, every year on the night of May 14th, the entire seminary gathers in silent vigil. Candles are lit, prayers are whispered, and for 1 hour the chapel doors remain open, not in fear, but in defiance, because the enemy still waits, because somewhere in some other dark place, another door is being carved in secret, and because the only thing that truly holds back the tide is faith freely chosen. It was called Discernment in the Shadows, a manual for clergy in the age of cosmic deception. The guide blended centuries of Catholic theological wisdom with the hard-won knowledge of those who had nearly been lost to the dark. It warned of subtle signs, dreams laced with foreign symbols, spontaneous linguistic knowledge of dead or never-recorded tongues, sudden shifts in doctrine laced with cosmic fatalism and spiritual ecstasy, devoid of humility or love. Francis wrote, "Not all light is holy. Some illuminations are traps. Discernment is not suspicion. It is love armed with wisdom." The seminary reborn. St. Augustine. Seminary now officially renamed Sanctum Vigilantia, though many locals continued to call it the Watch, grew quieter, more focused. No longer was it a place simply for men seeking ordination. It had become a citadel of spiritual resilience, preparing its students not only for the altar, but for unseen battlefields where scripture alone was not enough. Each seminarian now trained in theology and cosmic law side by side, prayer and ritual. Defense learning not just to recite but to wield faith, linguistic pattern recognition, to identify unnatural glossolalia, spiritual ethics to resist the seductive logic of beings who cloak dominion in revelation. The legacy of the 13. The 12 who had returned did not speak often of what they saw in the depths. Their memories came in fragments, echoes of impossible architectures and entities that moved like living ideas. But each of them became pillars of the Reformed institution, and Father Marcus Whitmore, now formally reordained with special authority, led the effort as High Rector of Sanctum Vigilantia. He refused elevation to bishop, saying, "I've seen what it means to seek higher stations. I prefer to stand guard at the gate." The seminary received quiet recognition from the Vatican's internal agencies, especially the elusive Congregatio de Arcana Fidei, the Congregation for the Secret Faith. They sent emissaries, scholars, and relics from across the globe, establishing St. Augustine as one of the few institutions in the world sanctioned to handle paranormal phenomena directly. But evil never rests. Every few years, strange visitors would arrive in Millbrook, a former priest driven mad by dreams of oceans beneath deserts, a young nun who recited prophetic psalms in a tongue she never learned, a family whose new home revealed doorways that weren't there the day before. Each time the guardians of St. Augustine would act, investigate, contain, not with fear but with hard-earned clarity. Final entry in the journal, written by Francis Benedetto. 15 years after the night of the opening, they will try again. Not here, perhaps, but somewhere. The entities below have patience beyond time. Their methods evolve, their lies become more convincing, but we have seen their face. We have walked their corridors and heard their truths. And so we wait, not as victims, not as warriors, but as watchers, until the light is needed again.